Thank you very much, Steve, for the presentation on the PEPPOL size. I think we have some questions here that popped out during the webinar on the chat function. So the first of all, so Martin and Steve, if you want to answer. So about the PEPPOL, why the following restrictions were introduced in the size. No more than one note is allowed on document level. Tax exemption reason code must not be used. Reference to preceding invoice shall be provided for credit note. A buyer reference or purchase order reference must be provided. The PDF of the invoice must not be attached embedded in the invoice XML. So if you have a clear idea on why these restrictions were introduced.
Let's see. For the first one, it is the reason is that the way the note and the note subject has been added as or syntax bound in the EN, it violates more or less a UBL rule that you should not repeat an element unless it's different languages. So the UBL explicitly say that these kind of textual elements they can be more or less as long as you want them to be. So the need for separate notes and the violation of the UBL rule was the reasoning for that one. The tax exemption reason code must not be used. That is, if it's not already removed as a restriction, it will probably be in the next round, because the reason for that was that there exists no code list for this element. So it cannot be used as it is now. But there has been discussions on this, and the restriction will probably be removed if it hasn't already been removed in the release in May. Reference to preceding invoices shall be provided for credit note. That is to ensure if you have a credit note, you need to reference some initial invoice. This is for the receiver to be able to process this correctly based on which invoice is this a credit note for.
See, if I remember correctly, it's possible to refer to also a period of time. So it's not necessarily the each and every invoice which is being credited, but also a reference to a period of time.
So it's referring to the class of the preceding invoice in the norm, that it must be there. Buyer reference or purchase order reference must be provided. This was a business requirement from several of the countries participating, and was added as based on that. The PDF of the invoice must not be attached. No, the reason is that there have been priorly also in PEPPOL major discussions on this, and one of the problems that arise when you attach the invoice as a PDF is what is the legal document, the XML file or the PDF file. And if there are differences in the two, that we actually in Norway, where we use EHS now, we see this, even though we have given strict recommendations not to add the invoice, we see it a lot. And we also see very often differences in the PDF version and the XML version.
Thank you very much, Steve, for this answer. So we have another question. Does PEPPOL CIUS support both UBL and UN CFACT?
Yes. The PEPPOL CIUS has in its Appendix B, the usage of the CII is described. We have not the mandatory BIS will be the UBL one, but there will be possibilities to state that you receive the CII, UN CFACT version, and the same rules and restrictions will apply. So there has been developed schematron validation rules for the CII or cross-industry invoice as well, but we have not created snippets, etc., and major examples.
More policy.
Yeah, but I cannot answer that one.
No. So thank you very much, Steve, for answering. Do we have any other questions from the participants? Again, you can post them in the chat function or use the raise your hand function. So there was a part of a question here about the code lists. So I'm copying here to the chat function so everyone can see.
So it's Caroline Corneau here from CEF also, and I can take this opportunity to update you a little bit on those two code lists. So indeed we are referring to the two code lists that were assigned to CEF in the making of the standards, so electronic address scheme ID and VAT exemption reason code. So to give a brief update of where we are on this, we started a few months ago a consultation with members of the multi-stakeholder forums and other key stakeholders, including PEPPOL, to really gather the requirements and see how to progress to have those two code lists. But also, as you know, we are working very closely with DG GROW, who's so in the Commission, the policy owner for eInvoicing, and they made it very clear that two aspects, that they were looking for a kind of more long-term sustainable solution, because CEF, as you know, is a program and will not last forever, and also that if possible, a code list is not restricted only to electronic invoicing, but if applicable, can also support and apply to general e-procurement. So we have basically for both, we have a first version, a first draft collecting the requirements as best as we could, but now we are looking into the ways to publish them, and so to answer to those needs expressed by DG GROW, we are working with the European Union Publications Office. And so, I mean, basically, this is going into the that process. That is why it's taking a bit more of a longer time than foreseen, and we have yet to reach a clear decision on the process, how to do this. This was, let's say, to update you on the process behind the scenes.
Thank you, Caroline. So again, if anyone has any other question, please feel free.
Yeah, I've received one question regarding it says directive, the VAT directive states the directive state VAT rules must be followed. So when we have a CIUS that requires buyer address, can public sector reject core invoices if the address is missing? So if I understand its question correctly, it's an example that the buyer and seller addresses are mandatory in the core, but I read this as as an example. I think it's a very, very complicated question actually. Because it's using the word reject, and on what grounds can you reject the reception of an invoice? I'm not a lawyer, so I should be very careful with saying anything. But anyway, I'll give it one small aspect is that the directive says that the public entities must be able to receive and process invoices that comply with the standard. And if the invoices doesn't comply with the standard, I would make the conclusion that they're not necessarily required to process invoices that are not compliant. If they can reject it, that is a slightly different question, because it might be a public actor might have rules other than just VAT rules on if you receive a document, even if it's not compliant, you might need to archive it. You might need to handle it due to other rules. So the word reject here is it's maybe more or less complicated in different countries. Also, if you make a purchase, you're obliged to pay for your purchase. So does it mean that if you're not receiving a compliant invoice, does that mean that you don't have? Can you reject to pay? That's a different question too. So this is, to me, this is a very complicated question because of the word reject. Yes, I think it might need to be further analyzed.
Thank you, Martin, for your answer. Indeed. So we suggest that Pedro sends us this question in case you want to have more an answer from the policy side of invoicing, because indeed it's a legal question. So we have another question for Martin or for Steve about the CIUS Camatron validations.
If it's possible to validate using validation services, and yes, I can't answer for all these compliance test beds, but there are several which provides the possibility to validate against both UBL and cross-industry invoice. The ones mentioned, I think, only has the UBL validation schematron published, but there are others which supports all. For example, I think the European Commission conformance test bed supports all. However, not the PEPPOL rule specifically. But there are validation services that can do this.
Thank you, Martin. So we received a question about the CIUS that have already been published. So I shared the link to the community-driven registry of services that you can also consult. So feel free to pose any questions to Martin and Steve. This is the opportunity that you have to interact with us during this webinar. So feel free to make use of it. As I told before, so the presentation and the recording of this session will be made available online. So you can also come back to it later on. And again, if you want to contact us, you can also do it via email.
Hello.
Hello.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. It's Sarah from Luxembourg.
Hello.
I had hello. Yeah. I had a general question that I'm asking myself for quite some time. In regards to the CIUS, what is finally the interpretation of the provision in regards to compliance of at least some of the CIUS to the directive itself, because
Sorry
the directive, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt
The
you.
directive
We're having some issues understanding, hearing you. So maybe if you can speak up a bit louder. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. It's more question on the legal basis and on the commission. Do you hear me now? Is this loud enough?
Maybe a bit louder.
Even louder. So I don't. Is it better?
Yes.
Hello? Yeah.
Hello. Yes. Okay. Better.
Yeah. Yes. My question is more on the legal on the commission. It is the position in regard to the compliance, let's say, of some of these CIUSs or potential conflicts of the CIUSs with the directive itself, specifically the Article 7, which clearly says that one has to accept invoices that are compliant with the standard, and also the recital 34, which we think that we are not allowed. Contracting authorities and contracting entities should therefore not.
Sorry to interrupt you, Gerard, again. I think the problem is with your connection, because we really cannot hear you. I think it's the internet connection. So I would propose that you pose the question in the chat function, that you write it down, if possible.
I'll try, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Meanwhile, so we got another question for CIV. So is it possible to use the PEPPOL network in order to transfer invoices compliant with other CIUS than the PEPPOL CIUS?
Both yes and no. If you have another CIUS that is registered in the SMP, so you need any other CIUSs need to be registered within the PEPPOL network and approved by PEPPOL for usage. But example, in Norway we have now cross-border we use the PEPPOL BIS, and nationally we use the EHF. When moving into version 3, these will be the same, but other CIUSs might be accepted and registered for use, but you cannot just send any other CIUS in the network, because the network is based on the recipient registering for receiving a specific document or transaction type.
Steve, can I make just one question or clarification regarding other CIUSs in PEPPOL? The PEPPOL has something that's called the mandatory rule that a certain version of a specific specification is mandatory at all time, and so the PEPPOL BIS is mandatory for all invoice receivers that are using PEPPOL. The PEPPOL BIS must be supported, but then it's also possible to additionally have other specifications. So if you need an extension, for example, you can ask for that type of specification to be possible to receive. But the minimum baseline is the PEPPOL BIS or the PEPPOL CIUS. Steve, can you just confirm that?
Can you hear me, Martin?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? My specific question is for Germany. As you might know, we have X-Rechnung as the size of the public authorities. And when this size was published, well, of course, the electronic address wasn't defined because it's not published yet, this code list. Therefore, I think that this is not a mandatory field. So I understood that in the PEPPOL network, that field must be mandatory. But if, for instance, the German government would say we have a portal and this portal shall be connected via PEPPOL, is then there a need to change the German CIUS, or how would that work?
I would say that if the portal acts as an access point to a public entity in Germany, so the portal becomes the reception point for invoices to a public entity, then for invoices to be submitted through PEPPOL to that portal, it has to have this identifier, because that identifier is the key of how to find the recipient in the PEPPOL infrastructure. It's like, so in that sense...
Yeah, I understand that, but the question is, do you need this identifier inside the invoice message, or would it be enough to have it in the envelope of the transport message?
In PEPPOL, it's required inside the invoice, because often in many cases the envelope is created based on the content of the invoice. So without the identifier, the envelope cannot be created by the access point. So the envelope is used access point to access point, but the invoice issuing system doesn't necessarily create the envelope. So the element must be available for it's like the window envelope of paper in the paper world. So.
Thanks.
But okay, let me just add one aspect too. If the public entity, the German public entity, who is receiving this PEPPOL invoice, it may be that they transform it into either an internal format. After they have received it, they can of course convert it into an in-house format, or even a slightly different version of UBL or cross-industry invoice. And then this type of element can be placed in a note field or wherever. But the fact that the reception point is in the access point in PEPPOL, so but what you do after that is really up to the public entity.
Yeah, okay. Another question, but this is my personal question. This PEPPOL CIUS is an UBL syntax. Is it possible in principle to transmit invoice in the CI syntax via the PEPPOL network? Yes,
Steve, I think Steve actually answered a similar question before. Yes. So Steve, if you since I'm already talking, so the documentation in the PEPPOL CIUS is specifically helping or describing using the UBL examples, but the same syntax bindings works for cross-industry invoice, and I think Steve also said that the schematron rules for the PEPPOL rules are defined also for cross-industry invoice, so it's possible. But within PEPPOL infrastructure, the receiver must support the UBL, and they may support the cross-industry invoice, so that is optional. So the baseline is the UBL version, but they can also support cross-industry invoice if they want.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a bit more information in Appendix B of the PEPPOL BIS on the usage of cross-industry invoice.
Thank you.
So we still have some minutes. If you still have questions. Okay, so we received the question from Gerard. So I just posted the question from Gerard for everyone to read. So what is the position of the Commission in regard to the potential conflict that can exist between making a size mandatory for a supplier and the obligation clearly defined in Article 7 of the directive that contracting authorities have to receive and process electronic invoices which comply with the European standards on electronic invoicing?
Yeah, so it's Caroline here again. We've had this question already discussed during the CEF invoicing event with Nikita Stampa from DG GROW, he's in charge together with Irena Rivière for invoicing, and so indeed this is related to what Martin presented with the two-letter word "or" that cause this ambiguity, let's say. So at this moment, what I got from the policy side as a general objective and line, let's say, is really to remain or to keep in mind the main objective of the directive itself, that is to enable cross-border interoperability. And so this is why, to respect this and to this aim, we try to limit the proliferation of CIUSes. And so at the moment, of course, this is why we have this type of activities, and what the Commission is supporting with the work done with the forum, multi-stakeholder forum, and with the CEN TC 434. But so yes, of course, creating a CIUS is an allowed compliant implementation, and ideally should be limited, for example, at national level. But the message is still clear that an administration must make sure that their invoicing system can process all automated invoices that comply with the standard. By that we mean that a contracting authority must pay the invoice if it receives an invoice that is conformant to the full standard, even if not to its own specific CIUS. This is let's say the main message that is clear from the Commission, from DG GROW, and so that's in this general line that we support all implementations. But again, this is that's a question. Again, the fact that it was mentioned again today, we will report this and discuss. Again with DG GROW how to clarify this if possible.
Thank you, Caroline. So we take one more question and we close, if there's still any question out there. So Martin and Steve, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, not for myself.
No, not for me either.
Okay, so thank you very much for your participation, and thank you for both presenters, Martin and Steve. So once again, the presentation and the recording will be made available in the event page where you registered for the webinar, and there's also a poll there, so you can vote on the topics that you want to see covered during these webinars. So we proposed a couple of topics already there in the page, but you can also propose new ones that are not there yet. So if you go to the event page, you can participate in this poll to find the next topic to be covered during these live webinars, which aim basically to cater for your needs. So any topics that you may want to have more information on, or that you feel it's a sensitive topic, or you have some doubts or some questions, just feel free to tell us, and we will do our best to support you with the webinar, because we understand that some of the questions that you may have are common to other members of the community. So we are very happy to help you throughout this journey. So once again, thank you very much. We have. So Gerard, this means that the contracting authority has in principle not the right not to accept only invoices conforming to his size.
Yes, so this is a follow-up of the question, and I was going to reply to Gerard that I propose as this goes really deep into, again, legal and policy matters, that we take this question to our colleagues in DG Grow, and we get back to you on this, and hopefully not only to you but more publicly.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. We hope to see you soon in the upcoming webinars, and we wish you a very pleasant day.